Unlike with my 5 videos long Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition review, Pokémon Detective Pikachu won't need that same treatment because its story was adapted from a Nintendo 3DS visual novel game. Although I have wanted to share what I think about as a Pokémon fan, and another reason is that I have taken a notice on how my videos have gradually begun to stretch so long that I can't be sure how many people are actually watching them to the end. Also, this was supposed to be a 500 subscribers special video, but then I got a writer's block while writing the original script and the pre-production ended up spreading way too long to the point, where at the time of this recording I'm currently sitting at 576 subscribers. Around this time that number has also gone up and down or gotten stuck there, meaning that it's probably a sign that this video has been waiting long enough to get made. To get the necessities out of the way first, Pokémon Detective Pikachu came out in 2019 as a loose adaptation of a Nintendo 3DS game, directed and co-written by Rob Letterman along with 4 other people. Unlike the most animated Pokémon movies which focus on Ash Ketchum, or the Pokémon Adventures manga that focus on all of the game's protagonists like Red, Blue, Green, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, Ruby, Sapphire, yes, that is what those 2 are named as, Emerald, Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Berlitz, Black, White, Lacto, Whiteo, in Japan I mean. The Western localizers renamed them as Blake and Whitney. Yvonne, Xavier, Sun, Moon, Henry Sword, Casey Shield, Scarlet and Violet. Those people decided to go for an easier route by basing this movie on a visual novel with a vanilla protagonist, whom they could essentially rework into their own original character, played by Justice Smith, just using the same name. And now to the plot commentary. The movie starts interestingly enough by showing Mewtwo escaping containment and then chasing down an unidentifiable man. After that we get some proper showcasing of how Pokémon have been created with CGI, like Pidgeots, Buffalots and what look like Shaymins, to look like they belong into this world without standing out too much. Our main character Tim is then introduced being drawn to a field by his friend Jack, played by Karan Soni, to try catch a wild Cubone for him as his Pokémon companion.
That is the perfect Pokemon for you.
Jack, I'm not looking for a Pokemon. I've told you this.
I have talked long and hard about this, okay? Water type is not right for you. Neither is fire type. Cubone is
lonely.
Exactly.
It's a ground type.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for that. Are there any other emotional truth bombs you want to drop on me?
Cubone is a ground type.
But right now, the truth is in my hands.
Unfortunately, because the movie came out 3 years into Pokémon Go being a thing, they try to catch the wild Cubone with those mechanics, without Jack even bothering to use whatever of his own Pokémon that he might have to first weaken it, or to keep it from attacking him and Tim as humans when just throwing a Pokéball and it doesn't work. It is also quite interesting for Tim to have knowledge of Cubone's Pokédex entry. This is not a good start. This is not a good start.
You know, not everyone can pull off wearing the skull of their dead relative, but you sure can.
He probably went to the Pokemon school and learned it as a random trivia. I wonder if how many Cubones actually live by the Pokédex description without even having a Pokédex. It could be excused for being common knowledge somehow, but that leads to speculations on what that implies about Tim and this version of the Pokemon world. In the following scene, Tim is established to be a salaryman working for an insurance company, showcasing him to be one of those NPCs not much involved in Pokemon affairs, which then draws attention to the education system that the Pokemon world has. Both in the games and in the anime, there are established to be schools preparing Pokemon trainers for their journeys before they turn 10, or 14 to 16 as shown in the Gen 5 Unova games, while the Diamond and Pearl anime established that gym leader Candice teaches adults who never became Pokemon trainers in their youth. I wonder if Rob Letterman and his co-writers were aware of that when writing Tim's characterization, which is then moved forward next when it is established that his father Harry living elsewhere in Ryme City has passed away. According to Bulbapedia, Ryme City is located in an unknown region, and based on the video Tim watches on the train on the way there is not connected to the Pokemon League. That is why Pokemon battles are forbidden over there. It has no gyms or Pokemon centers, and people just coexist with one Pokemon per person, like it's not that much different from normal. Although the lack of Pokemon centers sounds like an alarming flaw. When arriving to Ryme City, Tim meets up with his father's partner on the force, Ken Watanabe's character Detective Yoshida, to deal with his father's affairs as his next of kin. Detective Yoshida clearly tries way too much for Tim to tolerate to help him deal with his loss, to the point of basically telling him to get a partner Pokemon as an emotional support animal.
He may look grumpy on the outside, but I assure you, he is adorable on the inside. If you don't mind me asking, how come you don't have a Pokemon?
Who wrote this movie, by the way? I didn't think I'd realize written by or directed by this guy. But Tim decides to have none of that and leaves after getting the address and keys to his father's apartment. Before getting there, he has what could count as locking eyes with another trainer moment when confronted by Catherine Newton's character Lucy, who seems to be trying to portray herself like an anime character, and her Psyduck. This movie actually probably pushed some CGI for what some later, and actually probably helped Sonic movies to get made.
Psyduck! Psyduck!
Are you trying to rob me or just annoy me?
Psyduck!
He's with me. We need to talk.
We do?
I've been waiting to see who would open up that mailbox. You just walked into quite a story. Stories like this spread fear, and they're afraid of fear. But I don't fear fear. I walk the walk and I talk the talk, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get the honest scoop, and that's the hard truth.
This probably would look better as an anime.
I'm sorry. Who are you?
Lucy
Well, it
Stevens,
actually makes
reporter
sense
for
that
CNN.
this would be an anime,
Young.
but it's done in live
I
action.
work for the CNN blog, making Pokemon listicles all day, okay?
Fortunately, because Tim doesn't have a Pokémon and battling is illegal in this town, he is able to walk away from the situation and enter his father's apartment. There, Tim has some expositionary flashbacks, which imply that he didn't go into those Pokémon schools to prepare himself to leave home at 10 to 14 to 16 old to become a Pokémon trainer. Future Pika here. As I said in the beginning of the video, this is a revised script of what I originally threw together, and my narration in this part got somewhat mixed with scenes that either did or didn't happen, and I didn't realize the mix-up until I was in the middle of editing it. So let me try to rush through explaining this scene better. Tim's mother is dead, yes. How? No idea, and I do not want to speculate beyond that storytelling trope, where mother characters are usually killed off to give the main characters, male, female, or third option, a tragic backstory. Tim was still clearly raised more by his mother and then by his grandmother, with his father trying to be a part of his life. But when Tim was to travel to visit his father, he changed his mind at the last second and never got to spend time with him. Harry is established to have respected Tim's wishes, and so most of Tim's angst comes from his regret for not having gone to spend more time with him. And if Tim had gone to stay with his father, he would have likely taken him to go see the Pokémon League, where the trainers were battling each other for ranks, before getting to face off against the Elite Four and the champion of which region I cannot say, which so would have inspired Tim to want to become like them. Also, before that flashback only showing the young Tim refusing to go see his father, he is shown finding a vial of purple gas, inhaling it and releasing it outside to a herd of A-palms. And after that, Tim finds his father's Pikachu wearing a Sherlock Holmes hat and speaking in Harry's voice, but Tim doesn't realize it, probably because it has been so long that he doesn't remember what his father sounds like. Anyway, that herd of A-palm, having turned aggressive by the purple gas, called R, then drives them to flee to the roofs for a set piece. We get to see some of these scenes from the point of view of other people. And oh my god, help! And Ikue Otani gives some more work to Pikachu voices. Does not look funny.
Excuse me, hi, sorry. You can hear him, right? You can hear him talking.
There's Ikue Otani.
Pika, he's adorable.
You're adorable. They can't understand me, kid.
It's me. It's that stuff that I put up my nose. No, it was a gas. I was breathing
Okay, it
gas.
works. That's some works for the scene in many two things. After which they regroup elsewhere to establish that Pikachu had a short-term amnesia from getting separated from Harry. Past Pika continues from here on, and you'll hear from me again after the plot has been recapped.
So there I was, in the middle of nowhere with a bad case of the forgetsies. The only clue to my past is Harry's name and address inside this hat. So I made my way to the apartment, and that's when I found you.
All I want to know is why I can't understand you.
Can't help you there, kid. Like I said, I have amnesia. Can't remember a darn thing.
Okay, so you're a talking Pikachu with no memories who's addicted to caffeine.
I could stop whenever I want. These are just choices. Another round, extra shot, black as night. Thank you, sweetie. Look, I'm a great detective, but I can't solve my own
I now
mysteries.
understand
I
why
have no memory.
Rölli was given a ludicolo. While talking long enough to get on the same page, aka for Tim to stay in Ryme City to find out what happened to his dad, Pikachu brings up this important but overlooked fact about Harry's death.
I saw in the police report that he's
Just
dead.
because the cops say
It means
he's
that
dead.
he's legally dead.
Really? Did they find a body?
Yeah, did they find the
Well, I
body?
didn't think so.
Or any remains that would
Did
suggest that
report
he
also
is
say
dead?
that I'm dead? Because if I'm still alive and kicking, that means Harry's out there too. Case closed. But still open until I solve it.
I want to believe that if there was an Officer Jenny on the force, this little detail would not have been overlooked, because at least those lady cops took their job seriously. The next morning, after having properly been reading through Harry's case files...
This is what a Frenchman would call caliente fiesta.
You mean what a Colossian called?
I will never smell you.
Colosman. French doesn't exist in the Pokemon world.
I'm thinking...
Kalos is French, is France. Tim realizes that Lucy from last night, who identified herself as a journalist, was also looking into Harry's disappearance, and that gives him and Pikachu an excuse to look her up again. Turns out that Lucy is more of a coffee girl working for her hired via nepotism boss Roger, who to his credit actually gives her hard-handed advices on how to get promoted up from her low position the PG way.
Of Pokemon attacking
To
people.
actual
There's been no
people.
mainstream coverage. I think that
We're not a tabloid, which means that we don't report on rumours, gossip, or hearsay. It's not news if it can't be verified. You want a story? Find a source. Oh, and pro tip, a reasonable sense of fashion.
I wonder if the British thing was used because Sword and Shield were coming out, and that was basically Britain. Showing Lucy the vial of art that caused the A-Palm set piece earlier invites Tim and Pikachu into her office to show what leads she has and that they can follow while she is busy holding on to her job. By the way...
Trying to work me, kid, but trust me, I can... Oh, sweet. Mother of Arceus, that feels so good.
So,
It's pronounced Arceus. I thought that the Pokémon Company took over the international dubbing of the anime in the mid-2000s over the fear that people would pronounce Arceus the very wrong way in which Pikachu just did. Anyway, that lead Tim and Pikachu were sent to follow turns out to be a Mr. Mime, whose capture and interrogation is another funny set piece that was also clearly worked out to be put into the trailers with its pantomime performance. After managing to interrogate that Mr. Mime...
You been funny? You been funny, huh? I'll be laughing soon. Huh?
Take some real commitment to remember where the invisible canister is.
Oh, I smell what you're stepping in. That's right, Mr. Mime. You're about to be Mr. Melt unless you start talking. Cards, playing cards, poker.
I think he's talking about the R.
Someone was handing out R. Use your body words. Where? Circle, house, moon, house, moon, house. Enough of the games. Say it. Just say it! Talk, you stupid mind!
Relax. Roundhouse. The source of the R came from the roundhouse.
Nice work, kid. Maybe there's a little detective in you after all.
Yeah, I hope they had some bird heels. Tim and Pikachu find an illegal Pokemon fight club run by this guy Sebastian, where they use R to make the Pokemon fight more violently than how even Pokemon League rules would allow, and apparently on their own wild instincts like illegal dogfights that the series has been accused of, rather than with coordinated orders from their trainers when overlooked with a referee. I suppose this is where I should repeat myself from what I said in my old Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution review. Pokemon are not meant to fight each other violently to the death in Pokemon battles, any more than boxers, fencers, and martial artists are meant to fight each other violently to the death in the modern world's boxing matches, fencing contests, and martial arts tournaments. Pokemon trainers are called trainers, as they train the Pokemon they catch and make them stronger, more durable, and having them learn special attacks that can be used strategically to immobilize their opponent through status effects. Paralysis, frozen, burn, sleep, poison, confusion, wear them down, and end the fight by being the last one standing. As Sylvester Stallone said in Rocky Balboa,
ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
That is what Pokemon training is based on. The trainers do not force Pokemon to fight each other. They do the same thing that boxing trainers, fencing coaches, and martial arts teachers do with their students. They train, coach,
You teach me and I'll teach you.
That is the relationship between the Pokémon and the trainer. My point is that Pokémon training is as a sport, much like boxing, fencing, martial arts, and maybe even baseball, football, and basketball. All of them have athletes/players that need to be trained to be the best versions of themselves, to be successful in their respective sports when playing the game. Also, official Pokémon matches in the anime and some of the newer games do have the referees who can and will call the battle off if it goes too violent, while the trainers have the responsibility to throw in the towel when they realize they are losing. Ash's first gym battle against Blaine in the Indigo League was a good example of this.
Get it, Pikachu! It's not worth it. I quit. No badge is worth losing Pikachu.
I congratulate you for making a wise decision, Ash. Just in time. If you had been foolish enough to continue the match, you definitely would have been disqualified as a Pokemon trainer.
And Brock was also literally told this when he stupidly sent out his Rock-type Geodude to fight against fighting types.
If you're a real man, you know when you have to admit defeat. Time to face facts. You can lose today and win tomorrow.
Right.
That guy, by the way, scammed Ash's private away from him and he never got it back. And back to the movie, where Sebastian running the illegal fight club recognizes the Pikachu with Tim as Harry's Pikachu, who had beaten up his Charizard earlier and demands a rematch.
You give me my...
They should have had that Gengar fighting against a Nidoking. Not a Nidoking. Nidorin.
Tell him he's on, amigo.
During the fight where Pikachu realizes it doesn't remember any of its moves, Sebastian decides to cheat by using R to make his Charizard rage out, which leads to some more footage for the trailers when Tim decides to balance the battlefield by making more R get released to all the other Pokémon present there. After Tim manages to coerce useless intel from Sebastian during the commotion, aka a nameless doctor, Pikachu makes a Magikarp turn into a Gyarados by kicking it around, because that also happened in the anime.
You good-for-nothing fish! I don't want to be your master!
To scare off the Charizard, and the Gyarados uses Hydro Pump to flood the place, and when flushed away from that, Tim is caught and arrested by a squad of not Officer Jennies. But he is then released by Detective Yoshida going easy on him, and telling him to go back home.
It's very difficult coping with loss. Denial can be a...
No, I'm not in denial! I'm right! I know it! He's out there!
I never wanted to show you this, but I think it's important you see it.
Could be because of the movie's rating why they never saw... Did anyone investigate the scene? As in have CSI teams go over that place and find remains of his body at the scene to confirm that he is dead?
Should have gotten on that train.
Before that gets to happen, however, Tim and Pikachu are picked up from the streets and brought to meet the city's beneficiary Howard Clifford, who is the father of Lucy's boss and basically one of the many billionaire CEOs that the Pokémon world has, like the unnamed president of Silpco in Kanto, Mr. Stone of the Devon Corporation in Hoenn, and Lusamine of the Aether Foundation in Alola, and he is played by Bill Nighy.
Hello, Tim.
He knows you?
I see you've partnered with Harry's Pikachu.
And he knows me too.
You knew Harry?
Oh yeah,
In case Harry was worried, it was for me.
Howard reveals himself to have been Harry's last client in having hired him to find evidence against his son Roger, whom he claims to have been using the company to manufacture R, and shows that he has evidence of Harry having been caught by Mewtwo, who took away Pikachu's memories, meaning that they can find Harry if they find Mewtwo. With Lucy's help, because she works for Roger as an assistant wanting to be promoted to a real reporter at the local news channel, they managed to retrace Harry's steps to a PCL laboratory outside of town that, according to Lucy, had an accident on the night Harry disappeared. There they find genetically enhanced giant Torterras that didn't use Dynamaxing, which wasn't a thing yet when this movie came out, and Greninjas, who despite their water dark typing are still affected by Lucy's Psyduck using a psychic attack on them. Or maybe they were affected by proxy, where the attack hit the ground and the ricocheting lumps of dirt affected them. That also hit Pikachu, who as an electric type takes ground type damage, but is led by Bulbasaurs and Morulul's to Mewtwo, who heals Pikachu right before Roger arrives without any Master Balls or evil teams as backup to capture it by force. Anyway, before any of that happens, Tim and Pikachu found evidence back at the PCL lab that Harry was in truth hired to capture Mewtwo and bring it to the lab site, where that doctor whom Sebastian must have been talking about verbally confirms that Mewtwo was created or was last known to have escaped captivity from the Kanto region.
It escaped nearly 20 years ago from the Kanto region.
The long story short is that Mewtwo broke free thanks to Pikachu's seemingly given assisted sabotage, and that causes a second act low point where Pikachu leaves Tim feeling guilty for having unleashed Mewtwo to do whatever happened to Harry. While Pikachu is wallowing in self-pity, Tim and Lucy rush back to Ryme City to warn Howard about Roger, because Rotom phones didn't become a thing until Sword and Shield, and get separated when Tim leaves Lucy behind, and Lucy tries to use her reporter job to reach the mayor by taking an advantage of stealing the main anchor's spot when talked down as the coffee girl and told to get coffee while the main anchor is getting ready. While Tim is then on his way to Howard, Pikachu finds himself to have made it to the scene where Mewtwo attacked Harry at the beginning of the movie and finds
Greninja stars.
those stars, aka water shurikens, they usually dissolve. They are water that have not evaporated or been discovered by anyone else examining the scene, and comes to the detective conclusion that Howard had lied to him and Tim, which is what Tim learns in the next scene when the captured Mewtwo had been brought into Howard's office, where Howard is using R to enhance a machine to transfer his mind into Mewtwo to prevent himself from perishing to a disease that put him into a wheelchair.
This was never about curing me. I have found a path forward for all of us. Mewtwo has the power to transfer the soul of a human into the body of a Pokémon as long as the Pokémon are in a crazed state. The R gas takes care of that.
The balloons. The R gas is in the balloons.
And then goes to do the same with the citizens and their Pokémon attending a parade outside. It's also revealed that Howard used his Ditto to frame his son Roger for the crimes he was shown committing in the movie, but only those where he was wearing sunglasses to cover Ditto's button eyes. Yeah, that wouldn't have been a problem if he had a Zoroark, which can actually turn into convincingly looking humans and speak human language. I still remember the jump scare I got playing Black 2 when the NPC turned into a Zoroark. Pikachu manages to run to the scene to fight the Howard-possessed Mewtwo with the moves that it has recalled having, including Volt Tackle and Thunderbolt, while Tim has to survive all the Pokémon that the Ditto turns into until the real Roger shows up to save Tim, and then they spray the Ditto with R. And Tim can shut off the device Howard used to take over Mewtwo's body, which was left relatively unguarded unless Ditto was meant to guard it.
What have you done?
Howard did not think this through. Long story short is that Howard is arrested with Mewtwo released from his control, who then undoes the merging of the people and their Pokémon, including Harry and his Pikachu in revealing where he had been the whole time. Roger, with his position and reputation cleared, gives Lucy a promotion at the GCN for having covered evidence of the real story with what happened, and Tim decides to stay in Ryme City with his dad in having found a new purpose for sticking around. The end. On its own without knowing any better, I could see Pokémon Detective Pikachu as a proof of concept movie, because right after it we got other similar video game movie adaptations like the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, Super Mario Bros. And Galaxy, Five Nights at Freddy's, as well as The Last of Us on HBO Max, but unfortunately also Borderlands and Minecraft. Do with that comparison what you want. Back in 2019 when this movie came out, the latest mainline Pokémon game had been Sun and Moon, with their improved re-release Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon on Nintendo 3DS, with Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee having debuted on Nintendo Switch the previous year, and the next upcoming games were Sword and Shield. And the fact that it came out a year before the COVID-19 pandemic makes it feel like it came out longer than it actually did, with no plans or announcements of doing a follow-up. Or supposedly there are negotiations with a new team of directors and writers to do a follow-up, but the source I found for that information is from 2003. Fun fact, by the way, the 3DS game that the movie was based on ended without Mewtwo turning Pikachu back into Tim's father, most likely to set up the sequel game that came out on Nintendo Switch a few years ago. Meaning that the fact that the movie ended by doing that means that they were never going to make a sequel to it. Which on one hand is a good thing, because this one movie had a story and it managed to tell it without needing follow-ups. But on the other hand, there are other Pokémon spin-off games like the Pokémon Ranger games, Mystery Dungeons, which barely have any humans in them, and the games on GameCube like Colosseum and Darkness XD, what was it called that? Meaning that this movie could have since been followed up with disconnected sequels set in the same movie universe with a different cast. Production-wise, as I showed in comparisons during the story recap, the Pokémon showed in the movie translated surprisingly well to live action thanks to cooperation with an artist named RJ Palmer, who has done art of realistic-looking Pokémon. Casting-wise, I don't think anyone was poorly cast, even Ryan Reynolds, who was clearly hired as a celebrity voice actor, while Justice Smith and Catherine Newton also worked as well, as they could as a recreation of a vanilla protagonist and an original character. Same with Ken Watanabe and Bill Nighy, who apparently became a Pokémon fan while working on the movie, but the way how the movie mostly used original characters instead of referencing pre-existing ones seems to originate from the fact that Nintendo and Pokémon Company are so overly protective of them that they didn't allow characters like Ash Ketchum, Red, Blue, or even Professor Oak to be mentioned. Kanto region is all we got. But speaking of Professor Oak, apparently there had been years-long plans for him to be portrayed by a specific actor if a Pokémon movie were to be made. And because that actor, Robin Williams, is no longer with us, Professor Oak was not used in this movie either. Or any of the other Pokémon professors like Elm, Birch, Rowan, Juniper, Sycamore, or Kukui, who were all colleagues with Professor Oak in the games following Red, Blue, and Yellow, and before Sword and Shield came out. Or to be clear, that was more of a fan wish made up on the internet, which if it was true and Robin Williams was still with us when Detective Pikachu was being made, it sure would have been nice of him to appear in the end, maybe to give Tim a chance to choose a starter Pokémon since his father took his Pikachu back. Well, now this video has been done. I could have gotten it done earlier if it wasn't for that writer's block, but I hope it was good enough and everything I promised it could be when I announced it I would do it last year. I have plans to do more Pokémon videos in the future with my Pokémon Kalevala recap series, and I have games to stream from my Switch, but I also need to get busy with some other recent releases. To everyone who has watched here to the end, thank you for the 500 plus extra subscribers, and let's see how much higher I can still get on this slow climb I have been on since 2020. Now remember how YouTube works by liking this video, comment whatever you have to say about Pokémon, this movie, and how I managed to present them, share this video for more people to see, and subscribe for everything I need to get busy working on next. Also ding the bell to be alerted for the 3 to 4 times a week I do gaming streams for a chance to chat with me, and may your heart be your guiding key.